And we are live! Welcome back to another episode of The Jaylee Show. I'm your host, Jay Ludgrove, and each week we sit down with influence all across the world. And we talk about business and sales and all good stuff. This week we have the guest of all guests, the one I've been hoping for. We've been sending messages. We've been trying to make our calendars work, but quite frankly, it's only happened until now. So this week we have the man, the legend, the Robin to my Batman. The Batman to my Robin, Mr. Tony Gordon. How are you, sir?
I'm well. I've unmuted everybody. Yeah, good. I'm great. How's it going?
Yeah, very, very well. Tony's acting as producer and guest and half host today. So if you see him tapping around violently, then that's exactly why. So Tony, for those...
I've got to remember to look like you're here, right? But the camera's over here. So I'm like, which one am I looking at? Okay, so, hey, I'm a guest.
And for all our podcast listeners, you should definitely check out the YouTube show just for Tony's faces. So Tony, for those who don't know about you, tell us who you are.
My name's Tony Gordon. I'm the creative producer here at GLPro. I started the company with Jay, what is almost 5 years ago now. And amongst, 6 years of podcasting, 5 years of company podcasting. That's what November the 1st means.
So before all this, let's go back a little bit, right? Before we started the company, before we got into podcasting as a whole, before you first told me to go and host a podcast and I didn't know what it was, what were you doing beforehand? It was a good podcast. It was the longest podcast ever. So what were you doing beforehand? Like, how did podcasting find you?
Well, before that, so I was working at Microsoft in the Microsoft Game Studios, GTOE. It's now called something different, probably. Spending a lot of time working on games. I've been in the games industry for 10 years, mostly testing. And when you're games testing, you find yourself with a lot of time repeating the same task over and over again for weeks on end. Time in which you can work and listen to things. And that's where really my love for audiobooks and podcasting first came from. Once you found that you can kill a whole 8-hour day in three-hour podcasts, it's revolutionary.
What was the first podcast you found as well?
Because
you started listening to podcasts real early, like before there was podcast apps on phones and before people knew what a podcast even was. You already listened to them. What was the first one you stumbled across?
I'm trying to think. I mean, I definitely listened to Joe Rogan Experience in the early days of Joe, before episode, I probably dived in around episode 60, something like that was when I first started listening to that. And for the first podcast, I don't remember. It's for.
Indeed. And obviously, obvious to me and you, not only did you have a technical background from Microsoft, but also audio from years and years and years of making some of the finest music that's ever been made.
Yeah, and some of the worst as well. So just I did not mix the Brass Cats albums, but I did mix some terrible other things, that some of which are like Brass Cat things, but the actual main Brass Cat albums that sound great, I did not make them. But I did spend a long time recording music and working. We had a studio in the garden with the shed, which is our first office. And over that time, I learned a lot of things about how to fix terrible sounding recordings, because we did a lot of terrible sounding recordings. And then when we suddenly moved that over to video and voiceover, it all sort of suddenly fit into place. All that fixing knowledge I'd acquired over the years suddenly had a reason, rather than just this is terrible sounding music. Can we make it 4% better? maybe 4%.
What's the difference between editing music and voice then?
Music. There's lots of things happening all the time. It's almost the difference between sort of painting a thin line, painting a picture. There's a lot of skill in painting the whole picture, and music has so many different things you need to know to get it right. However, painting a fine straight line is not something that is a different skill almost. Equated and related, but a different skill.
So I think the word entrepreneur is kind of kicked around an awful lot because it's really in vogue and people think it's super cool. But, I don't like to call you super cool. No. You know that. No. But How many bits? You've run a whole bunch of businesses, right? So what are some of the businesses?
I guess that's true. I don't like. I used to like the word. I used to call myself an entrepreneur when I was like 16 because I was like, that's cool. That's right. That's cool. You know,
is
that in
that
the 2000s?
And is that because Del Boy? Is that because Del Boy was an entrepreneur?
It probably, yeah, almost certainly, right? I don't know where else I'd have got it from.
He probably would have said it wrong. Well, what are some of the businesses?
Oh, so where did it all begin? It began, I started a wife. So the first large-scale public Wi-Fi network in Europe, one of the very first ones, back when they were really the only large-scale ones outside of what you get in the house if you were like good at tech. This is back in 2003, I'm going to say, when Wi-Fi was there, but it was terrible and not everywhere at all. And the only other, at the time, there was only universities doing tests essentially on wide-scale Wi-Fi, and me and my dad just were like, yeah, it just clearly works, right? Let's whack it up on the roof and find out what happens, and we'll figure it out on the fly. And then we started that in the port in Barcelona because we knew lots of rich boats coming in, people who can afford the equipment. At that time, it was not cheap to get a Wi-Fi card with a thing that plugged into the end of it and the aerial up on the roof and all the. It was long, and then obviously a lot of people didn't think about it logically or ask the right questions or read any paperwork. So they would like get out to sea and they'd be like, my Wi-Fi doesn't work. I'm like, no, it's Wi-Fi that you pay for while you're in port. Like, it's very clear.
You're
very
at sea.
Clear.
You're at sea.
You're at sea. Yeah, you need a sat phone, man. We're not there yet.
And this is amazing. So I remember back then as well, like for you know there's people who are 17 18 years old now when you started that business, and dial-up was still a thing. Computers still used to go just to get onto the internet. So like Wi-Fi,
internet line. Yeah. In Barcelona, and actually getting a place that could get an internet line was very rare. Like to be able to pipe it into. I remember there was one apartment I had where the power company was selling internet through the power line, like you do in the house, where you plug the little block and it puts the your local Wi-Fi into the power, and then you put it out somewhere else. You know, so works on a small scale vaguely. Some of the power companies in Barcelona have started trying to do that on the larger scale, and it was very sketchy. No,
of course. You know. You can't send huge amounts of data across power lines.
And this was before Telefonica or any of the big boys had dived in. It was back when people were like, it's not going to be a thing. Come on, mate.
Wireless? Why would I want it to be wireless?
Yeah. So, and then eventually Telefonica dived in, and like we had a brief conversation with them about cooperating with me, in which they were very like not very nice or helpful. So then they were like, okay, well, just screw you then. We're just going to move in. And eventually, that's at the point where they started doing the citywide implementation. By which point we were a few years in, and I was probably like, I'm sort of done with this. It was a nice little bit of fun, but it's not really. Other than there was one point where I was going to go and work for Sunseeker, going around the world to fit Wi-Fi tech into the new Sunseekers that they were building, and I didn't take that opportunity. And sort of wish I did, but. Yeah, sort of glad I didn't as well.
I mean, you would have seen some incredible boats, ships, yachts, whatever they're called. Just got onto the most fabulous places on the planet, and made sure that
Barcelona though at the time that you ended up on a lot of people's boats at in that time, like especially Formula One come round. No one had internet on their boat, and all the Formula One drivers were like, "There's internet here. You would have on the boat," and they were like, "I have all the money." Like David Coulthard, I spent a lot of time with David Coulthard's crew, and like Jack Nicholson's boat was in the harbour behind my house for a long time. Never actually saw him. Never made it to one of those parties.
No matter how much you tried. And then what else? So you had the Wi-Fi business. What else have you had?
Around the same time, I was selling international telephone cards.
Right.
Allegedly, I think that was another little side business at the same time, which kept me sort of busy. Del Boy. I had to have my Del Boy jacket. You have to do a certain amount of businesses in a year to earn your Del Boy jacket.
Right.
So that was that. After that, what happened? I guess we came back to the UK. Started working in games on and off, and then sort of flitted in and out of that into. I ran a company for a while called UK Television, which was essentially the ethos of trying to get UK TV abroad for expats and sort of try and find a way of, in the legal system at the time, finding the loophole that allowed you to do so. So we had there wasn't
iPlayer, there wasn't BBC World or whatever. Maybe there was,
existed, but they were extremely restricted. So you could have a VPN, but VPNs weren't necessarily that solid. Like it was a little gap essentially between when VPNs realized that you could do it that way, and then everyone had countered that. That doesn't necessarily work. So what we used to have set-top boxes that were based in the UK that people rented and then viewed remotely.
Mental. So and then what else? And then what else? What other businesses?
I mean, there was the shared recording studio. I wouldn't necessarily call that a business because it doesn't.
Of course, we had the recording studio more or less the whole time. That's absolutely true. Yeah.
Always people practicing. Essentially, just There was a long period of time where there'd just be a different band turning up at my house every night, and I got to just listen to different bands rehearse. That could be very good or very bad, depending on the band, right? What else did I do? There was the UK TV.
Checkers.
Oh, Checkers Pizza. I opened a pizza restaurant. Oh yeah, I forgot about that one. That was left field. Not something I have any experience in. Really.
See, that's why I say you're a pure. Oh, good, someone's ringing the doorbell. That's why I say you're an absolute pure entrepreneur, because it's been new tech, it's been old tech, used new ways. You've done food businesses, tons and tons of stuff. Like you found a business in no matter what of it. So you're working at Microsoft in the games industry. Now, the first time I ever heard about podcasting was you telling me to host a show.
It was because it was like crunch time on Forza Horizon 2, and I had to work 7-hour days, 16 hours a day. And I'm like, I can't make it to my own podcast, Jay. I've organised a podcast. It's going to be like 6 people in my living room. I need someone to host it.
That's exactly what it was. And that was a great show. And I didn't even know what a podcast was at that point. So, and if I remember correctly, it was really, really, really difficult to like get online and get it up and running by that point.
So depending on how you did it, if Libsyn existed then, as an example, who are like one of the best hosting platforms even today. They existed, but they weren't huge, and no one really knew about it necessarily. And no one knew that you could go to them and they'd make it all simple. Or that it was a good idea to part with £7 a month or whatever it is to take that off your hand. What I had to do the first time is I set it up on SoundCloud, but SoundCloud pushed out an RSS feed for you, but that RSS feed did not work correctly. I guess is the best way to put it in terms of submitting it. So you had to then push it through a thing and change it to a thing, and it would tweak. I had a whole custom method that I did in the early days, which was a complete mess, complete buzz job, something that you just had to figure out, essentially.
But there was loads of roadblocks. There was so many roadblocks back then about people getting, just because you're good at audio, it doesn't mean that you'd be able to do any of the stuff like, what is an RSS feed? How do you make it work? Blah, 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 blah. No. Like it was so techie back then.
And luckily I'd had the time to kill at work around the end. I sort of had decided I wasn't working in the games industry anymore, and I was just there because they wanted to keep me there in case something went wrong for a while. So I spent a lot of that. It was a really good sort of 6 months towards the end of my games career, where I spent a lot of time researching podcasting and actually just spending time diving into it and testing it and breaking it, because that's the only way you really ever know what's wrong or what's right.
And actually get it live.
But we managed to get that first one live, but it was not. It meant I had to, every time I launched a show, I had to go and click a thing that ran and refresh the thing, and then the thing would go out, and the whole automation side of it was completely not there.
It's much easier today, man. It's so much easier today.
Even if Squarespace can do it today. I mean, yes. Squarespace can do it. Anyone can do it.
So, listen. Then we started the podcast, How to Write a Tune, good funsies. But what I know that you've listened to so many shows over the years. What's your favorite podcast?
A couple, yeah. At the moment, it's probably The Offensive.
Oh yeah. What's The Offensive?
The Offensive is a podcast about a fictitious Premier League football team called Ashford City. Come on, you super whites. And they're from Kent. They're like, because there isn't actually a Premier League club from Kent, and it's kind of fun. It's a funny thing. It's a funny, like, why is there not a Premier League club from Kent? They're right next to London. It should be a really affluent area for footballers, but there just isn't one. Gillingham are like the highest club in the football rankings. So they made up this club and interjected them into history. And they're just terrible. They're just like the example of the worst type of football club you could imagine. Like all of the stereotypes of terrible fans, terrible ownership, terrible management. So and it's a fictional show that's written week by week. They're just but it intersects with the real world in the real season. So it's released through as the season's released, like with game weeks, but they'll just remove a team here and there. And you never really notice that there are actually 21 teams in the league. They just don't address it. They just make it up as they go along. But yeah, they essentially it's something they manage to write it in such a way that they've got a long-term plan. But if something happens this week, they fit it around the show, and they're really very good at it. The voices are amazing, and it's just a bit different to everything else. It's not just a couple of people chatting.
You don't hear, there's not that many scripted podcasts like that where it's completely fictional and written. And if there is, they tend to be short, 10, 15 episodes. Yeah, exactly. And they kind of get it done.
It's not on the fly necessarily. It's those clever written on the fly ones that I really respect. It's that, but Saturday Night Live sort of thing. It's like,
that's what I was just going to say.
Like this, but it's really impressive that you do it every week.
Yeah, how on earth are you writing sketches for an hour and a half every single week? It's amazing. Okay, so what other podcasts you listen to?
At the moment, what was I listening to this morning? DC and Helwani, MMA Hour, which is Ariel Helwani and DC, Daniel Cormier, former heavy and light heavyweight champion, just talking. They do a lot of interviews with MMA fighters, and they actually get a lot of exclusive interviews on that show. So, for instance, spoiler alert, Blachowicz and Adesanya both won their title fights at the weekend. Both of them were on the show this week.
Wow.
So you get the horse's mouth interviews with on that show about MMA.
That's the thing I just love about podcasting. No matter what you're into, there is a show. I was talking to Katie today about the same thing. No matter what show, whatever you're into, there is a podcast, and it's probably every day.
Yeah, and it might not be about that, but it will be like there's a podcast that other people that are like that make, and they talk about other things, but they're your people, or like they're it's mental how many podcasts there are.
It does feel like the amount of podcasts across the entire planet have like doubled or trebled since we started doing it. It was such a brand new thing. There was just no one doing it, and probably that a lot of that was because of the roadblocks and, like I say, the technical know-how you needed to have. There are only so many Tonys out there who can make things work like that, but there's a bunch of people who can talk into a mic like me.
And the time, right? It takes time to propagate. People didn't even, at first people were like, what's that mean? And then once you explain to them, it was sort of like a radio show, but without any of the constriction. They're like, oh, it doesn't really make it sound much different, right? And then after a few years, they start to see, what? This is the most popular show in the world. What? The most popular show in the world. Shows in the world podcasts. Okay, now I have to figure out what this is. It just takes time sometimes.
Yeah, ain't that the truth? So, as you said at the beginning of the show, we are coming up to 5 years of GLProUK. In fact, next month is our 5-year birthday. What have you learned? What lessons have been over the last 5 years?
Yeah, good.
Yeah.
I have learned that you cannot do everything yourself, no matter how much you try. It will kill you. You can try, but you'll die. That's a fact. I've learned that that no matter how simple you think something might be, there's always a professional level to it.
Right.
What
do you mean?
I used to take the piss out of subtitlers and say that's not a job. That's not a real thing. There's no way that this is a whole person's thing. Here it is. It's really long. Practically, it shouldn't be, but it is. It's just because of various reasons to do with the English language, other languages, and tech. It's not actually the simplest thing in the world. And so I've learned to, wait until I've dived into something to judge it a little bit, rather than just be like, oh yeah, I can do that. That'll take me 5 minutes. Don't even worry about it, Jay. Sell.
And what about that? What about you've never managed salespeople before? And obviously, I know we're business partners, but you're definitely my boss when it comes to me being a salesperson. And you've managed to, help with the rest of the team.
I could have fired you.
Definitely. If I didn't do such a goddamn good job, you could have.
Yeah. I guess that's the difference between, I think that's a very good point. The difference between managing salespeople and managing, everyone else I've ever managed is not a salesperson, I'll put it that way.
Yeah.
Is that most people, when they have a problem, you need to address that problem. Salespeople live a cyclical existence. So you have to assess where in the month you are as to how important their problem is. if it's the last week of the month, it's not a real problem. Like they're just all up their own asses about the fact they haven't sold anything,
Right.
like within reason, obviously. But whereas a problem at the start of the month, that's a real problem, probably. you see what I'm saying? That's not the case with people who don't live in that cyclical nature.
No, I suppose when it's everywhere else in the business, it's a project base. So maybe that same thing happened to them as a deadline's approaching.
But it's not the same. It's not the same.
And it's easier to
right?
see.
Yeah.
And it's easier to see. I know that you're getting stressed because that thing has to be delivered in 3 weeks or 2 weeks or 10 days or whatever. Like, so I'm going to keep an eye on you. Whereas, like you say, salespeople, it's just each month, stress, and relax. Stress, and relax. Stress.
Yeah. Not always, but it's something that to be taken, or it's one of those things to take into account that you wouldn't necessarily think about otherwise.
Well, and what's great about working with and for someone like your good self is lots of tech people don't necessarily have particularly high EQ. Like we don't necessarily have a lot of interest at all in like emotions and stuff. And from experience, that is very much what you have to manage with salespeople and everyone. But it's it's the ups and downs, and you're really good at looking at stuff from people's point of views.
And stepping outside of that as well, it's ignoring the emotion. Like it's like, okay, well, how much? And RimWorld, if anyone that plays RimWorld, this is the debuff system when applied to HR is magnificent. And it's not just RimWorld, any game, but essentially most games have a buff or debuff system. You collect this item, you're now X points better at this, or you collect this item, you're now X points worse at this. If you apply the debuff system to people, in the real world, you can be like, he's being a dick today, but X happened last night. So if he was zero's normally here, and it's this easy to piss him off, and he's got this debuff applied today because of this thing that happened yesterday or this thing that happened today. Maybe I'll cut him a bit of slack because he's just been, you can use it to look at the numbers and be like, okay, maybe I shouldn't take that too seriously, or maybe, actually, there's nothing wrong here. What's something wrong? Because there shouldn't be anything wrong.
Yeah.
He should be plus 16. Why is he pissed off?
It's amazing to see you kind of like gamifying like people management.
HR.
Yeah, and HR is.
I've heard HR people talk about gamifying HR, and they don't mean what I mean. It's really interesting. They mean something way more boring.
But you're coming at it from gaming and then putting in HR kind of ideas, which, and to be honest, is a lot of, you do that across everything, right? Always try and make something more interesting by essentially like adding some sort of gamification to it.
Yeah, I think it's always a good idea. And if you can make anything more fun, it's easier to do. You actually get distracted by the game.
Like Waze used to be. So back in the day, Waze, which is the map app. Thank you. It used to have what were they called? Road goodies. It used to have road goodies, sweeties and stuff would show up on the map. So not necessarily on your route, but somewhere just off your route, there'd be a road goodie.
You get points.
And you get points.
You literally go like, boom, 1,000 points. And you'd be like, that.
And at one point, you were in the top, like, couple of % for the entirety of the world for Waze.
I was in the top like few hundred for a long time on the scoreboard because I was driving from Kingston to Reading every day
and taking random routes to go and get road goodies.
I got right down the A3 today because I saw a sweet down there. If I just go out past Great Guildford and go around that way, I might be able to pick it up. I missed it. I got to come back this way. I mean, it got a bit silly after a while.
Yeah, and all fair to play to Waze as well. They absolutely got rid of that functionality.
I think they were probably told to.
I think they bloody well should be as well. Yeah. I was spending so much petrol getting points, just driving to random places. So the future, I know you and I always come up with great big silly BHAGs, but we've got some things in the fire and such which we are actually looking to, hopefully would have achieved this year if the world hadn't set on fire. What are the things you want to do for the future?
Well, they've let Michael Bay produce and direct most of the first 8 Transformers movies. I'm not presuming they're going to take it off of him until at least 10.
Okay.
So that gives me a few more years to get in action. But I think Transformers 11, somewhere between 11 and 17, should be produced and directed by the greatest director-producer duo on the planet.
Love that.
But they've got all the assets. Like, I don't need to... just send me that shit. I'll make it better.
They've got the assets.
Seriously, it's not how I work with everybody. Like, I don't want to make it from scratch. Send me what you got. Like, give me the whole IP as is. I'll just fix it up. Little Jerry.
Just Jerry Ring out, just Optimus.
Just fix the story and reboot the HBO. And this is honestly though, this is actually I'm genuinely excited about the way that Warner Brothers and HBO Max are coming at fixing terrible movies and things like the Superman, Batman, the fact that they're Justice League, even the fact that they're recutting Justice League and letting giving HBO some money and their infrastructure. Got Zack Snyder back in, been like, go and make the movie you wanted to make with HBO. Yep. It could be 4 hours long. You could go, just do what you want. And I think the precedent set behind that, assuming that's successful, is great because I think there's a lot of terrible movies, like a really high percentage, and a couple of big companies having the sort of just the foresight to see that you can admit it was bad, like and say we're going to go again on this.
Yeah, we tried.
No problem with that. You're allowed to make a mistake,
and especially with something like the Snyder Cut because of personal issues, there was literally a problem, exceptional circumstances where that director had to leave and another director came in, and the end result isn't what people wanted, or overall was it? Yeah, I mean, it was terrible. I was trying to be diplomatic.
I like Joss Whedon, but if he's literally back to send me the assets. If you just sent me the final piece, I could have made it better. I didn't even need the files. Like, all we've got's the final bounce. I need it recut. No problem.
But I think that's the great thing because, like, we started to see it in the 2000s when you start to have TV shows have movie actors come into them. Like you'd have CSI and David Caruso would be on it.
That used to be death of your career, right?
Death, that's the end, right?
Even Entourage, that was still the case, right? Even at the time of the first few seasons of Entourage, it was only 10, 15 years ago. That was like the whole thing of if you're on TV, your career is dead. Ask Henry Cavill if that's the case today, like as an example, right? But
that's the thing is, but now the fact that stigma's gone, that you're not losing your career as a movie actor to go and go down or backwards to television. Is that and then with Netflix and streaming services, like storytelling has got better. Like we can say, do the 4-hour cut. It's cool. We'll do it in 4.
Yeah, so I've lost Jay. Is he going to come back? Are you coming back to me? Come back to me. Well, I don't know if you can see this as well, but it looks like we've lost Jay.
I'm back. I was just talking stuff.
Back. I was about to wrap up the show. I was going to wrap it because you went all frozen. I was like, don't worry, I got this.
I mean, I just dropped some knowledge bombs. That's all I'm going to say. I dropped some, possibly the most intelligent and important thing I've ever said on the J League. That's a shame. I'd try and repeat it. Maybe next time, right? Well, look, just in case the internet drops out again and we are at about the half-hour mark, we'll cut it there because we like to keep people able to get back to their days here at the Jelly Show.
I haven't pressed any buttons. Look.
There we go. Thanks very much, producer extraordinaire. We did spend all the time. So, as it says on the screen, you can find Tony at Tony Gordon on LinkedIn. Where else can people find you, Mr. Tony?
You can find me on YouTube, Bones Nosed, or GLProUK. You can also find the Bones Nosed podcast, which I literally never release an episode of, so don't worry too much about that. But do go and subscribe to How to Write a Tune. I haven't released a show in a few years, but it's the 6-year anniversary, and you never know, something might happen in the future.
Oh, I like that. I like that. Dropping hints. All right. Well, Tony, thank you so very much for joining us, and we'll see you on the next episode of The J League Show.